I only ordered food for the family, and my daughter-in-law smiled when a relative asked why I didn't get a steak or dessert. Am I family or not? I turned to ask Michael, my son. Don't do this. Not now, he muttered, eyes still fixed on his plate, chewing as if he hadn't heard. But the whole table fell silent when I said something no one expected. My name is Edward Barnes, 62 years old, a widower, and that day I sat in my own son's dining room, where warm golden light reflected off crystal glasses and the clinking of cutlery paused midair. On the shiny silver tray Emily brought out were 7 portions of perfectly pink steak, drizzled with fragrant sauce, accompanied by an expensive box of French pastries, each plate passed around with smiles and compliments, except to me. In front of me was only a cold piece of roasted chicken from the first round. No one reminded anyone, no one made up for it. They just kept eating, as if my lack was natural. I looked around, saw averted eyes, and heard the ticking of the wall clock cutting through the heavy silence. My breath felt heavy in my chest, and the question hung unanswered, like a cold knife slicing through the so-called family gathering. In that moment, memories pulled me back years ago, when the dining table held just me and my son, and the silence was never this heavy. I lost Linda nearly 2 decades ago, on a freezing winter morning in Oak Ridge. She left faster than we could prepare, leaving me and Michael, then just a 15-year-old boy who didn't even know how to tie a tie. I remember his face then, pale and scared, as if the world had collapsed. And for us, it had. I didn't have time to grieve long. I had to work. Days at the construction site, nights doing extra masonry jobs, weekends at the building supply store. The dollars I brought home were soaked with sweat and cement dust. But I felt relief because they paid for electricity, water, and most importantly, ensured my boy had 3 decent meals. Some dinners were just cheap stew and stale bread, but we sat across from each other, and I tried to stay cheerful with small talk so Michael wouldn't feel the void of his mother's absence. I still remember those summer afternoons in the backyard. I'd dig with a hoe while he followed, holding a small watering can. We planted tomatoes, cucumbers, and a long row of green beans. Every time he ran in excitedly to show me the first ripe fruit, I saw Linda smiling through his eyes. Those years were tough, but I never felt unhappy. Watching Michael grow stronger each day gave my life meaning. When he got into college, I poured all my savings and night shifts into his tuition. I remember the day I handed over the first check, my hands trembling but my heart full of pride. I also recall teaching him to drive in the old car I bought cheap from a friend, sitting in the passenger seat, half nervous, half laughing as he fumbled the gas pedal. I called it our first car, because every extra hour I worked, every penny saved, went into it. Then came his graduation day, and I stood in the crowd, watching him in his green gown, holding his diploma. I cried, not from sadness, but because I saw Linda living on in his success. I believed every sacrifice was worth it. I thought when he started a family, I'd gain more loved ones, more laughter in a house too long without a woman's presence. I still vividly remember the day Michael brought Emily home to meet me. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kitchen filled with the smell of grilled meat and tomato sauce. I'd carefully prepared to make the first meeting perfect. I wanted to make a good impression, to show my son I supported his choice. From the moment Emily stepped through my door that day, I felt an invisible distance form. She wore an expensive dress, her Chanel perfume wafting like an alien scent in my familiar kitchen, still smelling of the tomato sauce I'd just made. Before I could even say hello, her eyes scanned the room, lingering on the old wooden dining set I'd built myself in 1987. Then she gave a slight smirk. Her first words, soft but sharp as a blade. Oh, I thought Michael's house would be bigger. I stood frozen for a few seconds, still holding the wooden spoon. Michael quickly forced a laugh, put his arm around his fiancée, and said, Dad's house is modest, but it's warm. I knew he was trying to smooth things over, but Emily's eyes held only judgment. From that day I understood. She didn't see a home full of memories, only walls that weren't grand enough. In the months after the wedding, Emily's attitude became clearer. Every time they visited, she brought gifts, but always just for Michael. Once, she brought a fancy cake from a famous Chicago bakery, placing it right in front of him. You love this kind, right? Then she glanced at me, offering only a faint smile, as if I were invisible. I was used to being overlooked, but it still stung. One time when they came over, I made coffee, the cheap kind from the supermarket, because I never splurged. Emily took a sip, grimaced, and set the cup down, saying softly, It's a bit weak. I guess I'm used to pure Arabica beans. Her tone wasn't outright critical, but it carried a refined disdain, as if my years of frugality to raise my son were something to scoff at. Michael initially spoke up. Dad makes good coffee, you're just not used to it. That warmed my heart a little. But later, he stayed silent. Silent as she shrugged, silent as her subtle jabs became accepted truth. Worse still was the time I caught Emily rummaging through my study. I was coming in from the garage when I saw her opening the drawer of my old wooden desk where I kept financial papers and my savings book. When she saw me, she quickly made an excuse. "Oh, I was just looking for tissues, didn't know where you kept them." I saw her hands still on the book. Michael rushed in from the living room, confused, asking what was wrong. I said nothing more, just closed the drawer, but from that day, I knew Emily wasn't just dismissive, she was calculating. I overheard her whispering to Michael in the kitchen. "Have you checked that book yet? It's so little, I thought with all those years of work your dad would have invested in something." I pretended not to hear, but my heart sank. Another time, for Michael's birthday, I bought him a simple, durable watch to remind him of the years I taught him to value time. Emily looked at the box and frowned. "A quartz watch? I thought you'd have a Swiss one by now." Her words made Michael flush. He turned to me, about to say something, but then stopped. I saw clearly that he'd long chosen to side with his wife, or at least chosen silence to avoid conflict. That silence hurt more than 1,000 rejections. Bit by bit, these small moments piled up into a heavy burden in my heart. Every time Emily entered my home, I felt like I was no longer its owner. I became a guest in my own life. And Michael, the son I'd built everything for, was slowly becoming a stranger, sitting beside me but no longer my support. I tried to convince myself it was just a generational gap, a difference in lifestyle. But deep down, I knew a storm was brewing, and all my sacrifices would soon be tested in the cruelest way. Things kept sliding until last summer, when Michael and Emily talked about a trip to Lake Geneva. It was a humid weekend afternoon, and I was sitting on my old wooden chair on the porch, reading the paper and listening to the distant hum of cicadas. Michael called me into the living room, his voice full of excitement. "Dad, this year we're all going to Lake Geneva for a change of pace. We booked a cabin by the lake, plenty of room for everyone." I froze for a moment, my heart warming. It had been a long time since my son said "all of us" with such enthusiasm. Emily sat nearby, giving a half smile with unreadable eyes, but I brushed it off. I believed Michael, that this would be a chance to mend the quiet cracks in our family. I packed carefully, like a kid excited for a trip. I pulled out my old work suitcase from the closet, neatly folding a few comfortable outfits, the wide-brimmed hat Linda bought me when she was still alive, and a book I planned to read by the lake. I even brought my old fishing rod, picturing Michael and me standing side by side, casting lines into the calm waters of Lake Geneva. The night before, I called an old friend to brag. "I'm going on a trip with my son and daughter-in-law, like a real family again." My heart was buzzing, as if old age could start anew. That morning, I woke earlier than usual. The sun was just rising, its light spilling into my familiar kitchen as I brewed a pot of coffee, thinking I'd bring it along for the drive. When Michael and Emily arrived to pick me up, I had my suitcase neatly by the door. They came in, rushed but acting calm. Michael said, "Hurry up, Dad. The car's running outside." I nodded, taking just a few minutes to wash my face and change. I left the suitcase there, careful as if afraid someone might steal this long-awaited joy. But when I stepped out, the porch was empty. The sound of the car engine faded into the distance. My suitcase sat there, silent as I was in that moment. I hurried to the street, looking down the road, hoping they'd just stopped somewhere. But no, the street was empty, only the faint smell of exhaust lingering in the breeze. I stood frozen, my heart aching. No note, no goodbye glance. About an hour later, my phone buzzed. It was Michael. His voice was awkward, like he'd rehearsed. "Dad, Emily thought this trip should be for the younger family. I mean, you wouldn't be comfortable. The cabin's small." I went numb, trying to keep my voice steady. "But you said all of us." Michael paused for a few seconds, then said softly, as if justifying himself, "I wanted you to come, but you understand." I hung up without another word. In the quiet house, I looked at the untouched suitcase on the floor, a bitter testament to my exclusion. Every item I'd carefully packed now felt like a mockery. Linda's wide-brimmed hat, the book, the fishing rod, all reminders that I no longer belonged to what I thought was family. I sat down, hands trembling as I opened the old photo album on the table. Pictures of Linda holding a months-old Michael, him at his high school graduation, his radiant smile when I bought him his first car. It all flooded back, making me wonder how the bond we'd built could become so fragile, so easily broken. I sat there for hours, not eating, not drinking, just watching the light shift through the window. I realized the most painful thing wasn't Emily pushing me out, but Michael letting it happen. He didn't defend me, didn't fight for me, didn't even dare face me when giving his excuse. He chose silence, and that silence cut deeper than any knife. That night, I couldn't sleep. In the dark, I heard the clock ticking, each sound reminding me that my time with Michael was over, and he was drifting away step by step. The next day, I unpacked the suitcase and put it back in the closet. I tried to let it go, telling myself it was just a trip. But deep down, I knew I'd lost more than a vacation. I'd lost my place as a father in the family I'd built with my entire life. From that moment, I saw clearly. I was no longer the center of the home, just a faint shadow on the sidelines, quietly left behind. I thought the Lake Geneva incident would eventually fade, that I could swallow my anger to keep the family peaceful. But the truth was that wound was just the first crack in a wall, already worn with too many scars. In the days that followed, I looked back on the long road of everything I'd done for Michael and realized it all piled up into a mountain of emotional debt that was never repaid with appreciation. I paid his college tuition for 4 years at Madison, nearly $50,000 a year, while taking on extra projects, staying up nights drafting blueprints, often coming home exhausted and eating just dry bread. When he wanted to pursue grad school, I scraped together another $40,000, believing education would secure his career. I bought him his first car, a used but reliable Ford Focus for $12,000, money saved by selling my old work truck. When Michael married Emily, I covered the wedding, nearly $75,000, from the venue to the live band. Emily beamed then, holding my hand, calling me the best father. But just months later, her disdain showed. When they bought their first house in Oak Ridge's suburbs, Michael said they were short $350,000 for the down payment. I drained nearly all my savings and part of my retirement fund to give it to them. I told myself, this is for my son's home, so he won't struggle like I did. But every time I visited, Emily's eyes skimmed over me like I was an outsider stepping on their hardwood floors. That wasn't all. I covered Michael's credit card debts multiple times. Some months, the bills hit $15,000, all from shopping, trips, and parties. I sat him down, asking why he was spending so recklessly. He gave an awkward laugh. Don't worry, Dad. Just some small stuff, I'll pay it back. But the bills kept coming to my house, and I ended up paying. I even recall Emily coming to me in tears saying her car needed a new transmission, costing nearly $3,000. I paid, no regrets, thinking helping my daughter-in-law meant supporting my son's happiness. But the next time, when I saw their shiny new SUV in the garage, I realized I was just a convenient wallet. Every dollar I spent, I recorded carefully, not to demand repayment, but to remind myself I'd done everything for Michael's stability. Yet in return, their attitude toward me grew colder. Emily stopped hiding her irritation when I offered opinions. She'd say, just rest, we'll handle the money stuff. But then she'd whisper to Michael about how your dad doesn't get modern finance. Michael would nod, not objecting, not defending. I remember bringing food over once, knowing they were busy. Emily opened the door, saw the discounted frozen beef I'd brought, and her eyes flashed with disdain. You don't need to go to all this trouble. We eat out at restaurants now. Michael was right there, just smiling, taking the bag to the kitchen without a thank you. That night, I lay awake, thinking of the years Linda and I scrimped to raise him. Linda always said, don't give him too much, let him learn value. I didn't listen. I thought love meant giving everything. And the result was I became a walking bank, where my son and daughter-in-law could withdraw money anytime. Slowly, I realized my presence only mattered to them when tied to my bank account. They didn't need my companionship, my advice, or my love. They needed checks, transfers, and my quiet withdrawal of retirement funds to cover their spending. The most painful part was that Michael, the son I raised with every drop of sweat, now saw that as normal. He no longer saw me as a father, but as a financial obligation, a resource to maintain his small family's happy facade. I'd stayed silent too long, telling myself it was for love. But each day I felt emptier, as if every dollar I gave didn't just take money, but eroded the basic respect a father deserves. And in that buildup, I understood. The wounds didn't come from the money lost, but from the cold ingratitude of those I once called family. That August afternoon, Michael and Emily's house buzzed with laughter and chatter, the smell of grilled meat wafting from the modern marble-tiled kitchen. Sunlight poured through the large glass windows, reflecting off the long dining table where Emily's relatives had nearly all gathered. I arrived early, thinking I'd help prepare, but in reality, I became a servant at my own son's family gathering. As soon as I walked in, Emily handed me a list of chores. Wipe the crystal glasses, arrange napkins, check the cutlery, wipe the stems carefully. Smudges show easily, she said dryly, like I was a temp worker. I swallowed my objection, took a soft cloth and did as told, silently. As guests started arriving, I carried trays of ice, then brought out pitchers of water, while Michael, my son, stood outside laughing and clinking beer glasses with friends. A bit later, Emily's sister showed up in a short dress, lips bright red. She saw me struggling with a tray of dishes and smirked, wow, good thing you're here, or Emily would be sweating buckets. Her tone sounded like a compliment, but each word weighed on me, making my face burn. Emily just shrugged and added, yeah, Michael's dad loves staying busy. It's perfect for him. I stayed quiet, kept setting the table, arranging napkins neatly, pretending I didn't hear. The guests took their seats, chatter filled the air, and the meal seemed ready to start. I sat at the corner of the table with only the cold roasted chicken I'd brought out earlier in front of me. As everyone quieted down, Emily stood, went to the kitchen, and returned with a gleaming silver tray. On it were 7 thick pink steaks, drizzled with glossy sauce, their aroma filling the room. All eyes followed, murmurs of admiration rising. Emily smiled, handing the first plate to Michael, then to her parents, her sister and her sister's husband, and finally to 2 young cousins. Each got a steak placed neatly before them, along with a box of French pastries brought from Chicago. The table buzzed with praise, the sound of forks cutting into meat clinking, the light glinting off the juicy slices. Before me, my plate remained empty except for the dry leftover piece of roasted chicken. I looked around, hoping someone would notice the oversight, but no, not a word was said. Emily's sister raised an eyebrow and smirked. Guess Uncle Edward's eating light, huh? Getting up there in age. Her comment drew a few chuckles. My chest tightened, my face flushed. Emily looked up as if just remembering and said lightly, "Oh, I only ordered food for the family." Those words echoed in my ears, colder than winter wind. I turned to Michael, my son, searching for a hint of protest, a gesture of defense, but he just lowered his head, cut his steak, and chewed slowly, as if he heard nothing. I asked, my voice low and raspy, forced through gritted teeth, "Am I not your father, Michael?" The question hung in the air like a glass dropped on the floor, shattering into glistening shards. The room fell silent, only the ticking of the wall clock remained. Eyes darted around, some relatives sat still, avoiding my gaze. Emily gave a scornful laugh and shrugged. "Come on, don't make a big deal out of it, it's just a meal." But to me it wasn't just a meal, it was public humiliation. A knife slicing through the pride of a father who'd spent his life raising the son, now sitting silently before me. I saw Michael's shoulders tremble slightly, but he didn't look up, didn't speak, didn't defend me. His silence was the cruelest betrayal. I sat motionless, my hands clenched until my knuckles turned white. I looked around the table, seeing pity mixed with discomfort in their eyes, hearing forks resume clinking against plates as if they were trying to fill the void. But for me, nothing could fill it. In that moment, I realized that all the years of sacrifice, all the money, all the sweat and tears I'd poured out, couldn't buy me an equal seat in this family. I was left with a question lingering in a room filled with the smell of steak and pastries, a question unanswered but powerful enough to shatter my heart. Am I not your father? The air in the room was thick, like dense fog, and I could feel the heavy breaths of those around the table. I stared at Michael, the only son I'd raised with my blood and sweat, but he kept his head down, taking another bite of meat as if my question didn't exist. A rage surged within me, no longer contained. I slammed my hand on the table, the sound echoing as glasses rattled, and said in a hoarse but firm voice, "Fine, if you want to make me an outsider, then today I'll say everything." All eyes turned to me. A few relatives tried to interject with soothing words, but were stopped by the resolve in my voice. I faced Michael, my voice trembling with restraint. "Do you remember who paid every cent of your college tuition? Who worked himself to exhaustion, falling asleep at construction sites, to scrape together $50,000 a year so you could have that degree? Do you recall when you wanted grad school? Who emptied their savings, believing you'd have a bright future?" Michael frowned, but stayed silent. I pressed on, my voice growing tighter. "Who bought you your first car to get to school and work? Who paid nearly $75,000 for the wedding that your wife now uses to humiliate the very person who made it happen? In this house," I pointed around at the polished walls and expensive wood floors, "if I hadn't given you $350,000, would you two be sitting here looking down on me like this?" Emily's face hardened. Her sister winced and looked away. Whispers rose among the relatives, murmurs of unease. I took a deep breath and looked straight at Michael. "Son, I did everything for you, but what did I get? Scornful looks, a forgotten seat, and the silence of the son I sacrificed my life for." Michael finally set down his knife and fork, saying softly, "Dad, please don't say that. This isn't the time." I cut him off, voice sharp. "Not the time? This is the time. You've been silent too long, and that silence has killed me more than any words. I know you've been unemployed for a year. Don't think I didn't see. You pretend to go to work in the morning, come home exhausted, but you're just sitting at a screen applying for jobs you're not qualified for. Groceries, mortgage, credit card bills, all paid by me. And today I'm treated like a stranger at this table." The room erupted in louder murmurs. An aunt nearby shook her head, whispering, "Unemployed for a whole year?" Emily flinched, turning to Michael, snapping, "Say something." But Michael just sat there, face flushed, eyes fixed on the table. The truth I'd laid bare left him no room to deny. I stood up, pulling a thin, paper-clipped folder from the briefcase beside my chair. I slammed it on the table in front of Michael with a thud. The room held its breath. This, I said slowly, each word cutting through the air like a blade, is the draft of my new will. From now on, I won't pay another cent for you or your wife. My house, my retirement savings, all my assets, neither of you will inherit a thing. Emily's jaw dropped, her face pale. You can't do this, she stammered. We're family. I looked her in the eye and gave a bitter smile. Family? Family respects, loves, shares. All I've gotten from you two is disdain, exploitation, and bitter abandonment. From now on, you're no longer my kin in terms of my estate. The room was shaken. Some relatives whispered. A few nodded in agreement. An older cousin said softly, "He's doing the right thing." Emily shook her head frantically, trying to save face. "This is just temporary anger. You'll change your mind." But I looked at her, voice firm. "No, Emily, this is the clearest decision of my life. I've been asleep in hope too long, and now I'm awake." Michael sat frozen, his trembling hands touching the folder but unable to open it. He looked at me, eyes wet, but still no apology, no defense, and that silence said it all. The room grew stifling. The clinking of cutlery, laughter and chatter from before vanished. Only I remained, the folder on the table and the truth I'd exposed, leaving everyone stunned. Amid the lingering smell of steaming steak, I knew I'd done something irreversible, but it was the only thing preserving the last shred of my dignity as a father. No one moved as I closed the folder and stood. The sound of my chair scraping the wood floor pierced the thick silence. I put on the jacket hanging over the chair, buttoning it slowly, as if donning a final shield for my torn pride. No one stopped me. No one spoke to hold me back. Emily stood rooted, her face still pale with anger, while Michael kept his head down, hands clenched as if gripping the table but holding nothing. I walked toward the door, down the long hallway lined with family photos I once thought would be my lasting pride. Each picture I passed was a stab. Michael's graduation, me beaming beside him. His wedding, me in the front row, hand on my new son-in-law's shoulder with hope for a bright start. The family by the lake when Emily was pregnant, me mowing the lawn to make the shoot perfect. Now they were just cold wooden frames on someone else's wall, reminding me that my trust had betrayed its owner. As my hand touched the doorknob, only awkward whispers came from behind. No one had the courage to speak up, to defend me. The cold metal of the knob seeped into my skin, making me shiver, but oddly, a different feeling rose within. Relief. Painful, yes, but as if a weight had lifted from my chest. After years of being crushed, I'd said what needed saying, torn down the veil of silence, killing me day by day. Whatever the outcome, this time, I left with my own voice. The door closed behind me as I stepped down the porch. The August wind burned my face but felt cooler than the stifling air in the dining room. The street was quiet, maple leaves scattered on the gravel path. I walked slowly, my shoes tapping steadily, reminding me I was still here, still moving, needing no one to lean on. My old pickup sat in the corner of the yard, its paint chipped but the driver's seat warm as ever. I opened the door, slid in and gripped the wheel. My hands shook slightly, not from age but from the rush of emotions. I sat there a moment, glancing at the rearview mirror. In the lit window, Michael's silhouette flickered, but he didn't run after me, didn't open the door to stop his father. I waited a few more seconds, then turned away. The key turned, the engine roared, drowning out the lingering sounds in my head. The wheels rolled slowly over the gravel, carrying me away from the house I'd once hoped would be my refuge in old age. Driving back, Oak Ridge's streets were calm, as if nothing had happened. Lit windows and laughter from other families stung but also reminded me I'd escaped that false room. I didn't know what lay ahead, estrangement, gossip, or prolonged loneliness. But tonight, I'd chosen not to sit and take the humiliation. I'd chosen to stand, put on my coat, and walk out of a room I no longer belonged to. And in this new silence, out here it felt less heavy than the silence Michael gave me at the table. It hurt, but it was also clean. It was the silence of a different start, unclear in shape, but no longer the silence of a father reduced to a shadow in his own family. The next morning, as sunlight spilled through the living room window, I sat at the table, holding the old leather notebook where I'd meticulously recorded every expense for Michael over the years. The numbers danced before my eyes: tuition, car, wedding, house down payment, credit card debts. They stood like an indictment I'd written with my own sweat. I barely slept the night before, but strangely my mind was clearer than ever. For the first time in years, I knew what I had to do to break free from the cycle of silence, exploitation, and humiliation. I closed the notebook, put on a pressed blue shirt, grabbed my briefcase, and drove straight to Robert Klein's law office in downtown Oak Ridge. Robert, a middle-aged man with graying hair, had a kind face but sharp eyes. His office wasn't fancy like in the movies, just a tidy room with shelves of files and a Wisconsin landscape painting on the wall. He stood to shake my hand firmly, as if lending me courage. "Mr. Barnes, I read your email last night. Let's discuss details today. I sat, my hands still trembling slightly, but my voice steady. I want to change my will. Michael and Emily, their names are out. My assets, house, savings. I want them to go to a scholarship fund for poor students in the county. Robert nodded, unsurprised, opening a folder and taking notes. This is a big decision. Are you sure? Once signed, Michael and his wife can't contest it. I looked out the window at the morning sun reflecting off a high-rise, then nodded slightly. I've never been sure. I lived my life for my son, for family. But yesterday I realized the most painful truth. To them, I'm just a walking wallet. From now on, I want my money to be hope for kids who'll value the chance. Robert paused for a moment, then slid a thick stack of documents toward me. He explained each section: asset allocation, fund name, legal terms. I listened to every word, signed each page, feeling each stroke cut the chains binding me for decades. When I finished, I set the pen down and took a deep breath. There was a void in my heart, but not loss, relief. For the first time since Linda's death, I felt unburdened. I'd regained control of my life, no longer letting others decide my worth. Robert handed me a copy, neatly bound. From now on, your will takes effect upon notarization. Do you want to send Michael a formal notice? I gave a bitter smile. No need. Let them find out when the time comes. Sometimes silence is the loudest response. Leaving the office, I didn't drive home right away, but stopped at Oak Ridge's Central Park. I sat on a wooden bench, watching kids run across the grass, their laughter echoing, purer than anything I'd heard in Michael's house. I thought of the scholarship fund I'd just set up. Maybe it would give a poor kid a shot at college, someone who'd appreciate the help I never got from my own son. The thought warmed my eyes but also curled my lips into a smile. That afternoon, driving home, I noticed the familiar street looked different. The maple trees stood as always, the houses unchanged, but Oak Ridge felt lighter in my heart. I was no longer trapped in the role of the father who must provide. I'd chosen to take charge, to direct my love where it was deserved. With stepping into my quiet house, I placed the new will on the table beside Linda's photo. I whispered, "Honey, I finally kept my promise to you. No one will exploit our sacrifices anymore." And for the first time in years, the silent room didn't feel frightening, but like a peaceful pause where I could be myself, certain I'd done the right thing. News of the August dinner spread faster than I expected. Days later, my landline rang constantly with calls from distant and close relatives. They'd heard versions of the story from those present, each adding or omitting details, but the core was the same. I, Edward Barnes, was deliberately sidelined by my daughter-in-law in front of the extended family, while my son sat silently, eating his steak without a word to defend his father. In a small community like Oak Ridge, nothing stays hidden long. Linda's relatives called to console me, saying I did right by cutting them out of the will. A cousin of mine was blunt. "You've taken enough, Ed. They need to stand on their own." Meanwhile, Emily's family grew withdrawn, avoiding gatherings, fearing questions. Soon I heard many relatives declined Emily's invitations to the upcoming Christmas party. "We don't want a repeat of that scene," a cousin said frankly over the phone. Emily was furious but kept a calm facade. One afternoon I got an email from her, titled simply "Apology." Its contents were hollow. "If you felt hurt at the dinner, we're sorry. We all say things we shouldn't sometimes. I hope you understand and let it go." I read it over, then hit archive. There was no sincerity in it, just Emily's attempt to patch her image as relatives turned away. While Emily tried to control the narrative, Michael began to crumble. Old friends told me he was often at the local bar, sitting alone with a strong drink, face flushed, eyes glazed. Rumors of his unemployment spread. A contractor I'd worked with said Michael had lost credibility long ago, making promises he never kept. Now the truth was out, and no one bought his budget analyst facade. Debts surfaced too. One afternoon I got a letter from the bank, still sent to my address because Michael hadn't updated it. He'd missed credit card payments for months, with a balance over $18,000. I had no obligation to handle it, but seeing final notice in bold red still stung. I remembered all the times I'd paid for him, believing one more time would set him straight. This time I folded the letter and set it aside. I couldn't and wouldn't keep going. Emily felt the pressure as neighbors gossiped. Some longtime neighbors called, saying they'd seen her arguing with Michael in their yard. Her voice shrill, eyes flashing, while he just bowed his head, unable to respond. The man I'd hoped would be strong now stood like someone cornered. I didn't gloat, but I had no strength left to pity. It was all from his choice of silence. Each night I sat alone in my house, sipping hot tea, reflecting on the past. No one called to borrow money, no visits with probing eyes. The quiet felt disorienting at first, but grew into peace. I knew the storm among relatives was just beginning for Michael and Emily, and for the first time in years, I wasn't swept into it. I'd stepped out, letting them face the consequences they should have faced long ago. The phone rang one late autumn evening as I sat in the living room, holding a hot tea, listening to the wind whistle outside. The screen showed Michael's name. My heart skipped, hesitating, but I picked up. His voice came through, hoarse and weary. "Dad." A long pause, as if he were wrestling for words. "Dad, I know things went too far. I'm sorry." I didn't respond, just listened to his heavy breaths over the line. He continued, words spilling out. "I stayed silent that day, not because I didn't see, didn't hear. I saw it all. I knew how much it hurt you, but I was scared. Scared of Emily's anger, of losing face with the family, of being seen as a man who couldn't protect his own. So I chose silence. I thought it'd make things pass faster, but I was wrong." His voice broke, nearly choking. "Dad, I haven't slept in weeks. Friends, family, they've all turned away. My job, I lost it long ago. I feel like I've got nothing left. I want you to give me a chance to make it right. I'll do anything, as long as you still see me as your son." I closed my eyes, letting his words sink in, but my heart was heavy. Memories flooded back, a 5-year-old racing home on his tricycle, calling me his hero, the graduation where I cried with pride. Then the image of him at the August dinner, steak glistening on his plate, eyes down as I asked, "Am I not your father?" That silence was etched deep like a scar. I spoke slowly, voice heavy as stone. "Michael, you had 35 years to act like a son, and you chose silence." The line went dead quiet. I heard his sharp breaths, then stifled sobs. "Dad, don't say that. I just wanted to do right, but I messed it all up. Please give me another chance. I'll change, I promise." I looked at Linda's photo on the shelf, her gentle smile. I heard her whisper, "Enough, Edward, it's time to let go." I took a deep breath and said calmly, "I have nothing left to give. Your silence that day said it all." That was the verdict. No words needed. Michael broke down sobbing. The cries of a 35-year-old man sounded like a lost child, but they no longer moved me. I sat there, silent, letting him weep. Finally, he choked out, "If this is what you want, I understand." The line went dead, leaving only the long, hollow beep. I set the phone down, my hands trembling slightly. I felt no triumph, no victory, just emptiness, but within it, a piece of calm. I'd said what needed saying, owing no one another word. Outside, the wind blew harder, rustling dry leaves on the porch. I sipped my cooled tea, the bitterness spreading on my tongue, reminding me that sometimes silence is the cruelest end and the final answer to a lifetime of unreturned sacrifice. I left Oak Ridge one early winter morning, with fog still blanketing the suburban roads. The old house, where I'd built countless memories with Linda and raised Michael, was handed to a real estate company to manage. In my truck were just a few boxes, clothes, Linda's photo frame, worn technical books, and the old ceramic pot I used for planting. I drove toward Milwaukee, less than 2 hours away, but to me it was a whole new world, a place to start again, free from the family cycle that had drained me. I rented a small third-floor apartment in a red brick building near downtown. Not fancy, not spacious, just enough with a small living room, tidy kitchen, and a balcony overlooking a street lined with old elms. But stepping inside, I felt lighter. The room was quiet, clean, and wholly mine. No commands, no judging eyes, just me and a fresh space. Weeks later, I got an offer to work part-time as a consultant for a small construction firm run by an old friend for my site days. They needed someone with years of experience to review blueprints and advise on residential projects. I wasn't strong enough for field work anymore, but the job suited me and made me feel useful. I worked 3 days a week, saving the rest for myself. When I got my first paycheck, though small, I felt a joy like my early working days, because it was money I earned for me, not to serve anyone else. The small balcony of my apartment quickly became my favorite place. I bought a few pots, planting herbs and daisies. In the mornings as the sun rose, I stood there with a cup of coffee, watching tiny leaves sprout from the damp soil, feeling like those seedlings, small but full of life, ready to start anew. Some days I sat for hours just watching sparrows perch on the railing, their cheerful chirping replacing the arguments that once haunted me in the old house. Small joys gradually filled the void in my heart, reading the paper by the window in the early morning, visiting the familiar coffee shop on the corner in the afternoon, listening to the jazz records Linda loved in the evening. I started writing a journal again, something I'd neglected for years. Each page recorded a peaceful day, free from the layered wounds of ingratitude. Occasionally I heard about Michael and Emily through acquaintances. They were still fighting, drowning in debt, their reputation lost among relatives. I no longer felt compelled to intervene or guilty for not helping. I'd done too much, and now it was time for them to take responsibility for their lives. Each time I thought of them, I sighed, then turned back to my plants needing water or blueprints needing review. On Sunday afternoons, I often strolled in the nearby park. Once I saw a boy learning to ride a bike, his father running behind, holding the seat, face full of worry but beaming with pride. The sight stung my eyes, reminding me of old days with Michael. But the difference was, I no longer felt pain. I accepted that everyone has their own path, and I'd fulfilled my duty. The rest, I let the wind carry away. At night, I sat in my old armchair, looking out the window where city lights glowed against the gray sky. The stillness in my heart was no longer loneliness. It was the peace I'd sought for years, only found when I dared to let go. I was alive, not as a walking wallet, not as a scorned father, but as a person with my own worth, free to live the rest of my life on my terms. And in those seemingly small days, I realized I'd truly begun a new life. One autumn evening, as the chill wind from Lake Michigan swept into the city, I sat in my small apartment, the desk lamp casting a soft golden glow on an open newspaper. On the balcony, the daisies had begun to bloom, their faint scent drifting into the room. I was about to make another cup of tea when the phone on the table buzzed, the screen lighting up with a familiar name, Michael. I stood still, staring at the screen, my heart beating steadily as memories of the August dinner replayed like a reversed film, the tray of fragrant steaks, forced laughter, and my son's bowed head when I asked, "Am I not your father?" A question never answered. The phone's ringing filled the room, each chime threatening to tear through the quiet. But I didn't pick up. I let it ring, the green light flashing, reflecting off Linda's photo frame on the shelf. In that moment, I heard her voice whisper, "Don't go back, Edward. You've come so far." The ringing stopped, and the room returned to silence. I exhaled, not out of regret, but relief. I stepped onto the balcony, holding a hot cup of tea, sitting on the wooden chair I'd bought from a small shop in the neighborhood. Before me, Milwaukee's city lights stretched like a band of stars, cars twinkling below. I sat still, listening to the rustling leaves, breathing in the earthy autumn breeze. This silence was different from the one at that dinner. Back then, Michael's silence was a verdict, a knife severing our bond. Now, this silence was healing. It wasn't loneliness, but a space of freedom, where I wasn't belittled, exploited, or abandoned. I knew Michael might call again, might want to say something to salvage things. But like the city lights below, everyone has their own path, and I no longer needed to chase someone else's light to exist. I'd found my own, in the stillness, in the simple peace of a small apartment, a hot cup of tea, and the sound of sparrows on the railing in the morning. I took a sip of tea, warmth spreading through my chest. The phone lay silent. I smiled, looking up at the night sky streaked with artificial light. Not all silence is betrayal. Some silences, like tonight's, are the gift of freedom. And I knew, for the first time in years, I'd truly found peace. Edward Barnes' story isn't just the tragedy of a father abandoned by his own family. It reflects a real issue in American society today, the rift between generations, financial exploitation within families, and the value of mutual respect. Edward sacrificed his life, from paying hundreds of thousands for Michael's college and grad school, buying his first car, covering wedding costs, even dipping into his retirement fund to help with their house down payment. But in return, he was treated as a walking bank, left behind on the Lake Geneva trip, and worst of all, publicly excluded by his daughter-in-law Emily, who didn't serve him steak or pastries. That detail wasn't just tactless, it symbolized Edward's erasure from the family. Michael's silence that day was the heaviest verdict, because silence can be crueler than insults. The lesson here is that love can't mean unconditional sacrifice, and silence in the face of family injustice can shatter the deepest bonds. In American culture, where independence and self-reliance are prized, parents often sacrifice for their children's better future. But without gratitude and respect, that sacrifice becomes a burden. Edward only reclaimed his dignity by cutting his son out of his will and redirecting his assets to a community scholarship fund. It's a reminder that sometimes love means stopping the giving and redirecting value to those who deserve it. Americans today can learn from Edward. Set boundaries, speak up instead of staying silent, and remember that family bonds must be built on mutual respect. If you empathize with Edward's journey to reclaim his dignity, subscribe to the channel to catch more meaningful real-life stories. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next video with deeper lessons about family bonds and the true value of respect.